and Inspector Calls explores complex social issues through its well-drawn characters, each representing different facets of society and morality. Set in 1912, the play is a critique of the class system and the capitalist ideals prevalent at the time. The arrival of Inspector Goole at the Birling family's home sets off a chain of events that reveals the selfishness, greed, and moral shortcomings of each character, along with their complicity in the downfall of a working-class girl, Eva Smith. Here we explore the main characters of the play in depth, analysing their roles, characteristics, and their moral development, or lack thereof, throughout the story. Arthur Birling. Arthur Birling, the patriarch of the Birling family, is a wealthy businessman whose views are central to the themes of social responsibility and class. He embodies the capitalist mindset of self-interest, wealth, and a lack of concern for the lower classes. Birling's speeches in the early part of the play, especially about the future, are heavily ironic, given that the audience knows the historical events he dismisses are about to happen. For instance, his optimism about the impossibility of war and the unsinkable Titanic immediately undermines his credibility. Birling is described as a heavy-looking, rather portentous man, a reflection of his self-importance and overconfidence. Throughout the play, he remains largely unrepentant, showing little understanding of the inspector's moral lessons. Birling's main concern is his social standing and the potential damage to his reputation and business, rather than the welfare of the girl whose death is being investigated. This is evident in his reaction to the scandal, as he's more upset about a public inquiry than the death of Eva Smith. Birling's primary flaw is his unwavering belief in individualism and capitalism. He is convinced that success is a personal achievement and that societal problems, such as poverty, are not his concern. This mindset leads him to dismiss the inspector's warnings about collective responsibility. His rigid adherence to these values and his desire to protect his family's social position leave him unable to reflect on his complicity in Eva's fate. Even by the end of the play, when the truth about the inspector's identity is called into question, Birling is quick to revert to his original mindset, refusing to accept any moral responsibility. Sybil Birling, Arthur's wife, represents the rigid social attitudes of the upper class. Described as a rather cold woman, Sybil is the epitome of pride and prejudice. Her staunch belief in class hierarchy and her sense of superiority over the working class are immediately apparent in her interactions with others. Like her husband, she is more concerned with maintaining her family's social status than recognizing her moral failings. Sybil's involvement in Eva Smith's downfall comes when she, as the chairwoman of a charitable organization, refuses to help the girl. Eva, pregnant and destitute, sought help from Sybil's charity, but Sybil, upon learning that Eva used the name Mrs. Birling, was offended by what she saw as a mockery of her family. Sybil's refusal to help Eva is motivated by her belief that Eva is not deserving of assistance and that she is lying about her circumstances. This act of cruelty highlights Sybil's lack of compassion and her detachment from the struggles of the working class. Sybil's refusal to accept responsibility or learn from the inspector's visit is one of the most striking aspects of her character. She remains steadfast in her belief that she has done nothing wrong and that the blame lies entirely with Eva Smith, whom she calls a girl of that sort, even when confronted with the possibility that her son, Eric, is the father of Eva's child. Sybil's reaction is not one of guilt or remorse, but of shock at the scandal's potential to damage the family's reputation. Her ability to remain morally unrepentant and blind to her own faults illustrates the deep-seated arrogance and self-righteousness of the upper class. Sheila Birling. Sheila Birling, the daughter of Arthur and Sybil, undergoes the most significant moral transformation in the play. At the beginning, Sheila is presented as a somewhat naive and self-centered young woman, preoccupied with her engagement to Gerald Croft and the trappings of her privileged life. However, as the play progresses, Sheila becomes increasingly aware of her moral responsibilities and the consequences of her actions. Sheila's involvement in Eva Smith's downfall occurred when, in a fit of jealousy, she used her social standing to have Eva fired from her job at Millwards, a department store. Sheila was angered by the fact that Eva, who was working as a shop assistant, looked better in a dress than she did. This petty act, driven by insecurity and privilege, had devastating consequences for Eva, who was already struggling to find stable employment. Unlike her parents, Sheila is quick to recognise the inspector's moral lessons and accept responsibility for her actions. She shows genuine remorse for her role in Eva's suffering and becomes increasingly critical of her family's unwillingness to do the same. Sheila's emotional responses throughout the play, her tears, her anger, and her sense of guilt, contrast sharply with the cold detachment of her parents. Her growing awareness of social injustice and the need for change make her one of the few characters who experiences true moral growth. By the end of the play, Sheila emerges as a voice of reason and social conscience, insisting that it doesn't matter whether the inspector was real or a hoax. Their actions still had real consequences. She is determined to learn from the experience, showing that she has embraced the inspector's message of collective responsibility. Her transformation from a shallow, spoiled girl into a socially aware young woman is one of the play's key arcs, representing the potential for change in the younger generation. Eric Birling. Eric Birling, Sheila's brother, is another character who undergoes significant development throughout the play. At the start, Eric is portrayed as awkward and immature, often drinking too much and making inappropriate remarks. However, as the inspector's investigation unfolds, it becomes clear that Eric's involvement with Eva Smith is far more serious than initially suspected. Eric's role in Eva's downfall is perhaps the most directly damaging. He reveals that he met Eva at a bar and after a drunken encounter coerced her into a sexual relationship. Eva later became pregnant, and Eric stole money from his father's business to support her. Eric's actions are reckless and irresponsible, and he is clearly ashamed of how he treated Eva. His guilt is compounded by the fact that, unlike the others, he had a personal relationship with her and knew about her desperate situation. Despite his moral failings, Eric shows a greater capacity for remorse and self-awareness than his parents. He is horrified by the way his family has treated Eva and angry at their refusal to accept responsibility. Like Sheila, Eric is willing to learn from the inspector's visit and acknowledges the importance of taking responsibility for one's actions. His emotional breakdown during the play, particularly when he learns of his mother's role in refusing Eva's plea for help, reveals his inner conflict and guilt. Eric's development mirrors Sheila's in that both siblings represent the potential for moral growth and change. While their parents remain entrenched in their capitalist, individualist values, Eric and Sheila show that the younger generation may be more open to embracing social responsibility and collective accountability. Gerald Croft. Gerald Croft, Sheila's fiancé, is a more complex character in terms of his moral standing. At the beginning of the play, he appears to embody the ideals of the upper class, handsome, charming, and successful. However, his involvement in Eva Smith's story reveals a more troubling side of his character. Gerald's relationship with Eva, whom he knew as Daisy Renton, was more personal than the other characters' interactions with her. He met her while she was working as a prostitute, and unlike the others, he provided her with financial support and a place to stay. However, while Gerald may have acted out of kindness initially, his actions were still rooted in self-interest and power. He began an affair with Eva, only to discard her when it was no longer convenient, showing a lack of long-term care or responsibility for her well-being. Gerald's reaction to the inspector's investigation is notably different from Sheila's and Eric's. While he admits to his affair with Eva and expresses some level of regret, he is quick to distance himself from any deeper responsibility for her death. When it is revealed that Inspector Goole may not have been a real police officer, Gerald is the first to suggest that they can forget about the whole affair. His eagerness to dismiss the inspector's visit as a hoax suggests that, like Arthur and Sybil Birling, he is unwilling to fully accept the moral implications of his actions. Gerald's character serves as a bridge between the older and younger generations. While he shows some remorse for his actions, his reluctance to engage with the inspector's message of collective responsibility ultimately aligns him more closely with Arthur and Sybil Birling. His refusal to learn from the experience leaves his moral development incomplete by the end of the play. Inspector Goole. Inspector Goole is the catalyst for the events of the play and serves as Priestley's mouthpiece for the themes of social responsibility and morality. From the moment he arrives, the inspector exerts a powerful presence, commanding the attention of the Birlings and forcing them to confront their complicity in Eva Smith's death. His calm, authoritative demeanour contrasts sharply with the evasiveness and self-interest of the other characters. The inspector's role is not just to uncover the facts of Eva's life and death, but to challenge each character's moral beliefs. He systematically exposes the selfish Inspector Goole is a symbolic figure who embodies social conscience and moral judgment. His name itself, Goole, suggests something ghostly or otherworldly, which aligns with the play's ambiguous ending about his true identity. The inspector's purpose is not merely to investigate a crime, but to force each character to confront their own ethical failures. He is not a traditional detective, concerned only with facts and legal consequences. Instead, his line of questioning delves into the moral responsibility each character bears in relation to Eva Smith's death. Throughout the play, Inspector Goole delivers several powerful speeches about the interconnectedness of society. His most notable speech emphasizes the idea of collective responsibility, which is one of the play's central themes. He warns the Birlings that we are members of one body and that their actions have consequences for others. This view is directly opposed to Arthur Birling's capitalist, individualistic philosophy. The inspector also represents the voice of the oppressed, speaking for the unseen working class that characters like the Birlings have harmed without consideration. The inspector's final speech, where he warns of the coming fire and blood and anguish, is a foreboding reference to the World Wars, which the audience in 1945 would have already experienced. This warning underlines Priestley's socialist message. If society does not learn to care for all its members, especially the most vulnerable, it will suffer devastating consequences. What makes Inspector Goole particularly intriguing is that his true identity is never fully explained. After his departure, the Birlings discover that no police inspector by that name exists, and there is no record of Eva Smith's death in the way the inspector described. This leaves the audience questioning whether Goole is a supernatural figure, a figment of the Birlings' collective guilt, or simply an ordinary person operating under a false identity to make a moral point. Regardless of his true identity, his impact is undeniable, as he exposes the moral corruption of each character and leaves them, and the audience, reflecting on the importance of social responsibility. Eva Smith. Although Eva Smith, also known as Daisy Renton, never appears on stage, she is central to the play's narrative and themes. Eva is symbolic of the working-class individuals who suffer as a result of the selfish actions of those in power. Through the inspector's questioning, we learn that Eva was a hard-working, decent young woman who was repeatedly mistreated by the upper classes. Eva's story begins with her dismissal from Birling's factory for advocating for better wages, a punishment for her attempt to stand up for her rights. She is then fired from her next job at Millwards because of Sheila's jealousy, exploited by Gerald, and mistreated by Eric. Finally, she is denied help by Sybil Birling's charitable organisation, leaving her with no support and no options. Each of the Birlings, as well as Gerald, plays a part in her downfall, making her a victim of their collective moral failures. Eva represents not just one individual, but the countless others like her in society who are vulnerable and oppressed. Her suffering is a consequence of the indifference and exploitation practiced by the wealthy and privileged. In this sense, Eva's character is deliberately vague. She is given multiple names, and details about her life are often incomplete, because she is meant to symbolize every working-class person who is wronged by those in power. The play leaves some ambiguity as to whether Eva Smith was a real person or a composite of several women. This ambiguity emphasizes that the play's focus is not on the specific details of one person's life, but on the broader societal injustices that people like Eva face. Whether or not Eva existed exactly as described, the moral lessons of the play remain the same. The actions of the Birlings and others like them have real and devastating consequences for the less fortunate. The role of class and morality in the characters. The interplay of class and morality is central to the development of the characters in An Inspector Calls. Each of the key characters represents a different attitude towards social responsibility, largely influenced by their class positions. Arthur Birling represents the self-interested capitalist who believes in individual success and denies any obligation to those less fortunate. His moral code is driven by profit and social standing rather than compassion. Sybil Birling embodies the arrogance and cruelty of the upper classes, as she uses her position to judge and condemn those she deems beneath her, like Eva Smith. Her refusal to accept responsibility for her actions highlights the hypocrisy of the so-called charitable efforts of the wealthy. Sheila and Eric Birling, the younger generation, show a capacity for moral growth. Unlike their parents, they are willing to learn from the inspector's visit and accept responsibility for their actions. They represent the hope that society can change and become more just. Gerald Croft, while more complicated, ultimately aligns himself with the older generation's desire to maintain the status quo. He, too, is unwilling to fully confront the moral implications of his actions, despite showing some regret for his treatment of Eva. Inspector Goole acts as the voice of moral truth, reminding the characters and the audience that all individuals are connected and that those in privileged positions have a duty to care for the less fortunate. The play critiques the rigid class structure of Edwardian England, showing how the upper classes abuse their power and fail to recognise their responsibilities to others. Through the character of Eva Smith and the investigation led by Inspector Goole, Priestley exposes the moral failings of the wealthy and emphasises the need for social change. In An Inspector Calls, the key characters serve as representations of the broader themes of social responsibility, class conflict, and morality. Through their interactions with Inspector Goole and their varying degrees of complicity in Eva Smith's death, the play challenges the audience to reflect on their own role in society and their responsibility to others. While characters like Arthur and Sybil Birling cling to their capitalist, individualistic values, Sheila and Eric offer hope for a future where people might take collective responsibility for the well-being of all. Priestley's powerful social message, delivered through the nuanced development of these characters, remains as relevant today as it was when the play was first performed.